Montana Territory, spring of 1883. The wind ran low through the cottonwoods along the mussel shell and carried that wet earth scent that tells you snow finally gave up. You know what I mean. So I lifted Pa's rifle and stepped onto the porch like I'd been doing it all my life, even though my hands wanted to shake. He pulled up 20 feet out, lifted a gloved hand like a man walking into church, hat brim hiding most of his face, beard rough, shirt dusted from so many miles he wore the road on his back, and he said, easy as anything. I ain't here for trouble, ma'am. Saw smoke. Thought I'd make sure nobody's in need. And that's how Cal McRae rode into my life the week my stew pot was heavy and my heart was empty. Yeah, that happened. I told him I was fine because pride is a stubborn mule, but I let him water his horse and I set a bowl between us on the porch step. And he ate like a man who knew how to be grateful without begging, slow, careful, head a little bowed. And when he asked how long I'd been out there alone, I told him since last May. Pa took sick and never stood back up. The land didn't notice and the seasons kept turning. And he studied me with those steady eyes and said, all right, just like that, no big speech. Only a man choosing to pause. One day slid into 3 and turned into a week because he kept making himself useful. Re-roofed the chicken coop. Taught me how to set a snare without spooking the world. Got my mean mule to stop biting everybody but the weather. And every night he took the barn while I barred my door and told myself I was safer for it. Even when I knew safety had changed shape and now looked a lot like a quiet man whittling on my steps at sundown. We talked in pieces, not confessions, but little truths. And on the 4th evening I said I haven't been kissed, not once, not ever, because I figured if I said the most fragile thing first nothing else would scare me. Let me back up a sec. I don't know why the words jumped out. Maybe the way the light fell gold across his jaw. Maybe the silence that didn't feel empty. And Cal, he took off his hat slow, like a man removing it at a graveside, and said we'll start slow. We don't have to hurry anything we mean to keep. And the kindness in that landed right where the winter had lived. He told me later he'd ridden dispatch in the war in a gray coat, which is a thing a man says soft out here because even the wind holds politics. And he said it not ashamed, not proud either, just honest. And I understood that kind of honesty. The kind that makes people judge you before they even ask your name. You know what I mean. So when I saw the wild plum blossoms west beyond the creek, I said we should ride out. And among those pale flowers he looked at the world like he hadn't seen it bloom in years. And it hit me that I wasn't lonely in the way I'd gotten used to. I was waiting. Now here's the twist. Because the prairie never lets a story rest, it sends one more rider down the road at the worst possible moment. We were working that back slope. Cal with a spade mapping trenches with a boot heel and twine because he'd noticed the runoff that might carve my garden away. When a deputy rode up from town with a paper in his pocket and an old thunder on his face, said he was asking around about a horse thief they'd lost in last week's storm. And sometimes a man looks like someone he's not, and sometimes he is someone he's been trying to quit being. And I saw Cal go still in a way that wasn't fear. It was calculation, the kind a courier learns when running letters through gun smoke. The deputy's name was Mason Whitlow, red sash, sharp mouth. And he kept his hand near his holster while he asked where Cal came from, who he'd worked for, what brand his horse had carried 2 towns back, and I could feel the creak of my life change direction. Because one word wrong, and that man would haul Cal to the edge of somebody else's misunderstanding. And here's where the first act breaks open. I stepped between them with dirt on my boots and Pa's old deed in my hand, and said if you're here with accusations you can take them to my porch where I coo. EP the coffee and the truth, because out here a woman standing her ground is how the fence posts stay in. We poured coffee in the doorway because that's neutral ground. And Cal told it plain, dispatch rider, Texas birth, headed to Fort Benton with pelts, shoe thrown in the storm. Not starving because he knows how to stretch luck. And I told Mason that horse had been watered and brushed under my eyes, and I'd stake my name and my land on the man sitting at my table. And do you know what broke the tension? It wasn't logic. It was the sound of thunder rolling up the draw and the sky going that green-black color that means the river's got opinions. We all looked east at the same instant. Because if the mussel shell swelled, the little bridge would go and the backfield with it. Second act, counterpunch. We ran, all 3 of us. No time for court or grudges. And Cal shouted orders like he'd been born to direct storms. Dig the trough here. Break the channel there. Stack the stones tight as teeth. And I don't know how to say it except that fear can be turned into work if someone shows you where to put it. So I put mine into a shovel, and Mason, curse him, put his into hauling timbers. And for an hour we three were not accuser and accused, and the woman in the middle. We were just hands against water. And when the crest came, the trench yawned and drank, and the bridge groaned but held. And afterward we stood dripping mud and rain and something like relief. Said he'd mention in town that the folks out this way were squared away, and you could tell that was the closest thing to sorry he carried. And he smiled a little and said habit, and I thought I could live with a man whose first instinct is to build a channel before the flood arrives. The rain moved off, the ground let go of its fear, and life leaned forward again, not rushing, just steady. He shifted from the barn to a lean-to by the shed, and then one night I didn't let him pass my threshold. Told him the cot by the hearth was as if he wanted it. No hurry, no promises, just room. And he said he wasn't a man to predict far ahead, but he hadn't found a reason to leave. And that's how people like us say the word stay without scaring it. There was a barn dance in town a few weeks later, and I put on a pale cotton dress that made me feel like sunlight even though my hands shook. And when we walked into that hot room with paper lanterns and fiddle music and pies sweating sugar into the air, nobody stared the way they used to. Well, a few did. But when a man as calm as Cal sets his palm at the small of your back, you grow taller without moving. And we danced slow, not to the song so much as to each other. And on the schoolhouse porch afterward, I asked him if careful was his only speed, and he said with things that matter, yes ma'am. And then he kissed me like rain on dry ground. Measured, sure. And I thought, all right, I can learn this. Days stitched themselves together. Trenches that caught the next storm. Shelving he built in the root cellar for jars I hadn't filled yet. A second quilt sewn from his ruined shirts. Coffee before chores. Dusk on the steps with our knees touching like an ordinary miracle. And the talk we'd been walking around came to meet us, simple. True. Not a proposal, not a contract. Just two people deciding to put their names on the same season and see if it held. And it did. By June I told him I wanted a second garden bed, and he said that sounded like a man staying put, and I realized I'd only left the land once since he came. And when the sun slid low we sat on the porch, and he laced our fingers, and I said I never thought I'd have something that felt like mine without having to fight everybody for the right to keep it. Winter fires, summer dust, the bridge never went again. The chickens multiplied like gossip. He built a second room onto the cabin, and I kept Pa's old rocking chair. And in the fall of our third year, I gave birth to a boy with his father's steady eyes and my mule's stubborn mouth. And we named him Eli, because names don't need a reason when a thing feels right. You know what I mean. If you need that big cinematic ending, take this one. A blue-black night, stars like frost pinned to the sky. Our boy heavy asleep in the crook of my arm. The whole world holding its breath and exhaling easy. And here's the open question that keeps me honest. Because the prairie never stops sending riders. Come spring, a survey crew will hammer stakes along the far ridge talking railroad. And Cal will look at me, and I'll look at him, and the thing we've kept true will have to choose between quiet and change. And maybe you think that choice is simple. Maybe you don't. I'm not telling you which way we'll jump. Not yet. What I know is this. A deputy rode in ready to drag a stranger away and left with mud on his boots because we all fought the same river. A woman who'd never been kissed learned to start slow and still arrive where she meant to. A man who used to outrun his past learned that staying is its own kind of speed. And a little homestead on the Muscle Shell decided to hold. So tell me, on Min True Vayu and everyone listening, what's the right call when a community decides who belongs? Was Mason wrong to suspect first and help second, or is caution its own frontier law? Was I reckless to stake my land and name on a drifter? Or is trust the only way a place like this becomes a home? Drop your take. Argue it out. Tell me where you stand on justice out here. On what a town owes a stranger and what two people owe each other when the river rises. Because I'll be right here on this porch, listening to that water.